Hi, welcome to Game Dev London. I'm Chris Payne. Today we're going to be talking about setting up a game studio and some of the realities of what that is like. My guest today is founder of Game Dev London, Stuart DeVille. Let's bring you up. Hi, Stuart.
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. So
Nice.
we were going to talk about what it was like setting up a studio, because you'd mentioned that there's a lot of encouraging advice on how to go about making games, and even about sort of incorporating yourself as an independent studio, but that's not necessarily the right route for everybody who wants to get into game development.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that it's not particularly a bad thing, but there is a lot of stuff out there now, particularly for people who are saying "Oh, it's never been easier. You can start up today. There's so many free tools out there. You can just get going, and you can be a successful entrepreneur. You could do it too." And some of them, there's some dubious folk out there who are like, "I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and I've got a six-figure income." I don't believe that at all. And you can do it too. And here's my top 5 tips or whatever. When really they're just trying to get some kind of engagement from online. So I just kind of want to be the sanity check, the antidote to that kind of stuff out there, I think.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So in terms of different sort of career paths, if someone was looking to get into the industry, it depends what they want to do, really, doesn't it? Because if you're looking to focus on a particular skill, such as character art or sort of like developing complex programming systems, those are the sort of things that you would be far better off working within the ecosystem of a large studio, so that you have a complete focus on that task. Whereas setting up an indie studio requires you to wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different jobs.
It's also really tempting to do because a lot of the people that are out there doing it, you don't. There are people out there who talk about the failures, but mostly they're like, "Well, I failed for 5 years and now I've got some success." Or, but there's definitely a
Yeah,
lot of markers out there. There's a lot of people that we look to, especially even ourselves, right? That we're like, "Oh, they've made a success," and we dig into anything that they will tell us about how they did it and what things that they feel were the thing that made it successful. Um, so yeah, and I think that it just makes it really enticing. People just think, "Oh, if that person did it, and maybe that person was just started out as a programmer, or there's always this underdog story." They're
yeah,
like, and then I just decided to do it, and I'm now for the first year or something, I was wearing all the hats, and it was hard, but it was good, and
yeah.
just glorifying just how hard it actually is.
Yeah, it's a classic case of survivorship bias. You look at
Mm,
the studios that have made it to see how to do it, rather than looking at the studios that fell by the wayside to see what could go wrong. Um,
mm.
so that's an interesting one, because
There's like a shocking stat out there as well that's like 1 in 10 has some success, which means that there's 9 studios for every one, and that's not even like one fully successful. That's one that has releases a successful title, not a company that is successful for the next 10 years. Um, yeah, so there's 9 other studios that are just bombing, and God knows what happens to them.
I think bombing is probably as rare as you know full success. To be honest, I suspect that sort of like eight
Yeah,
out of ten of those studios are just startups that sort of like bimble along for a little bit, for a few years, but can't ever get enough momentum to get off the ground. Um,
yeah,
I'll be frank. My own studio is kind of still in the bimbling along phase. We need to,
yep.
but hopefully, sort of, once we get the current products out, it will be successful, and that will get us off the runway. And but yeah, it's been 4 years so far, steering through, dodging rubble on the runway, basically trying to get up enough speed to take off. That is a
Yeah.
strained metaphor.
No, it's pretty good because yeah, if you're trying to get your plane up off the runway and all of a sudden there's a person on the track, you okay, slow down for a minute, let them get off the way, and then we'll turn around, we'll go back, and we'll try again, and then you're going and oh no, there's some birds, a flock of birds, they're on the track. There's always something on the track. There's something that you didn't expect that's there in the way, and you can't just for the most part you can't just then go well from here on we'll ramp up again. You kind of have to go back a little bit in most cases, right?
It is actually quite an apt metaphor because your runway is the amount of time that you can continue paying your team, or if that's just you yourself, for. Because everybody's got to eat. So
yeah,
if you've got enough money in the bank to sort of like pay your own bills and pay your team for a year, then you've got a full year to just crack on and make stuff and get something out in the hope that it will bring you enough income to like extend that runway as far. So you're having to we can switch metaphors and Wallace and Gromit. It's kind of like you're building your train track as you go, and you're just hoping that like you can like sell your game for new pieces of train track to put down in front.
Yeah, and the level of success depends on how much more track you can lay down, right? It might be that you've got enough track for like, well, we're going to have to cram it again and try for another. Or it might be a case of actually, you've got enough. Your game is giving you enough momentum that you can keep going for some length of time.
So, of course, in that respect, setting up as setting up as a solo dev or a very tiny studio has a lot of benefits because that means that your running costs are a lot lower and you are, your every little bit of income goes a lot further in terms of buying you runway. If you once you get up to a studio with like 40 or 50 people, you are having to buy like gold-plated railroad track segments to extend your runway because you're burning through so much money just to pay everybody on the team. I dread to think what the running costs for a studio like Rockstar or one of Ubisoft's many studios is. It will be multi-million-dollar monthly expenses, which is why they need games to be enormous hits, so something like what's a recent example of something that was like Control, multiple awards, it went to the top of several charts, but it's not sold enough to be considered a massive hit. I would hope that Remedy have done pretty well out of it because it's a cracking game, but it's one of those where sort of like the big studios, they don't want to get out of bed unless it's going to be a multi-million-dollar franchise. It has to sell kind of like 3-5 million.
They're also in quite a comfortable position, the big guys, obviously, because they can do a ton of research fairly easily. They bin a ton of prototypes. They have money to do rigorous testing. Whereas if you're just starting out, you're probably starting out with just an idea for a game that you've played a game when you were young or whatever, or there's a story that's in your head and you're just like, that would make a really good game, and then you're like, that's what's going to make me the money, and that's what you like start out with. But really, and the only way you can test that, a lot of people fall into trouble being in that echo chamber, right, where they tell their mum, and their mum's like, oh, that sounds amazing, and then they tell their friends, and their friends are being supportive, of course, and going, yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And then the second that they might have spent, especially if they're solo devs, they might have spent a year or a bit more getting something to be a playable demo. Then they put that out there, and people are like, that's okay. And you're like, oh my god.
The best feedback is always from strangers, because they will tell you what they actually think, rather than telling you what you want to hear. But yeah, I mean, you make a really good point actually about for like a huge studio, the expense of having like a half dozen people build a little prototype of a game, that's peanuts compared to their monthly expenses on a studio of a couple of hundred people.
Yeah.
But obviously it's also kind of like a couple of years worth of runway for a tiny indie. But the thing is, for that big studio, if you've got like 200 staff, you can put 6 people on the prototype for a little bit. But the difficulty is that unless that prototype turns into something that has the potential to be a multi-million-dollar franchise, there's no point in pursuing it, because if it doesn't have the potential to like make megabucks, then it's not going to cover enough of their costs. It's not helpful for a big studio to sort of like have a small indie team that makes small indie games that maybe just covers that team's expenses. It needs to be scaled up. So in terms of career options then, because obviously I've worked in AAA on the Lego titles, and also I've started my own studio, and so the contrast between them is quite glaring. But they're both fun in different ways. Stu, I mean, you run your own company. How have you found that compared to working for like a bigger place?
It's completely different. I think so. I mean, in my career, I guess it's my career life, right? Every job that I've had, I've tended to work my way up the ladder because I don't like being at the bottom where I don't have enough control over the things that are going on around me. Mm-hmm. So there's quite a lot of similarities in terms of like I'm used to managing people, but I'm not used to. I think the big difference is that I previously wasn't used to managing people and having it be like almost a be all and end all situation. Because when I'm working with someone else and I'm managing their people, things can go a little bit awry. Like maybe someone is, maybe I'm being too lenient with someone who's being or like taking too much time off work or whatever. That doesn't really affect me in any way. It affects the company, and when it comes to companies, it probably not affects them massively, but it's the kind of thing that affects the company. Whereas for me, for my studio, if I don't manage someone properly and who isn't able to bring me the work that I need, then that's a really big problem for my studio, and it becomes a really stressful situation for me.